Good evening. This is Kathleen Mallory, Planning and Sustainability Manager with the City of Oxnard. This evening, I'm joined by Emilio Ramirez and also Opportunity Program. First, I wanted to give an overview of the housing element. The city's sixth housing element is a required element of Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, and they are set by the Southern California Association of Government. The housing element is a required element of the general plan, and it's required to be reviewed and certified by the State of California Department of Housing and Community Development for compliance with state law. The housing element covers an 8-year state mandated update cycle, and we're currently in this upcoming cycle of the 2021 through 2029 window. The final RHNA numbers were released just recently, February 22nd of this year, and they increased by 20 units since the last time that staff presented the housing element to committee and council, which was back in September of 2020. The housing element is required to be adopted by the City Council no later than October 15th of this year, or the city will be out of compliance with state housing element law and subject to consequences such as limited access to state funding and potentially risk of lawsuit. For a quick background and update on how we got to where we're at today, in October of last year, the City Council provided policy decisions which helped guide our work on the current sixth cycle housing element preparation. The direction from Council included allowing to use up to 1,000 ADUs, accessory dwelling units, or junior accessory dwelling units to meet the city's lower income RHNA. Discontinue an existing program in our housing element termed the All Affordable Housing Opportunity Program, or AHOP, and instead utilize the state's default density of 30 units per acre for affordable housing sites. Third, Council's direction was to study and look at, where feasible, the local preference strategy in the city's inclusionary housing ordinance. Fourth, the direction was to study any needed revisions to the city's inclusionary housing percentage requirements. And then finally, to adopt a plan or program to encourage housing in the business and research park zones, as well as studying the ability to provide additional housing along the area known as a high quality transit corridor, which extends from the freeway down Oxnard Boulevard, roughly to Channel Islands Boulevard. It's important to note that staff has been doing a lot of work on our housing element since we presented some policy questions to council in early September. We've held a variety of community input sessions. We launched a survey. We participated regularly with the House Farm Worker Group and those meetings, and we also conducted community virtual meetings. The housing element update also was prominently posted on our housing element update website. As mentioned earlier, on February 22nd, just a little bit ago, SCAG announced new sixth cycle RHNA numbers, which will be approved by SCAG on March 4th of this year. The new RHNA numbers slightly increased, as I mentioned, by 20 units. And the final RHNA you can see on the right-hand side, the lower income RHNA for Oxnard, which is comprised of very low and low income units. We'll have to provide housing of 2,911 lower and very low income units. Moderate provide 1,538 units. Above moderate, 4,100 units. And then our total obligation for housing construction over the next sixth cycle, which is an 8-year planning window, will be 8,500. Ask the committee a question pertaining to a new program that looked interesting and was looked at and studied in other communities. So the question is, does the committee support creation of an institutional land use housing opportunity program? So institutional properties are properties which are owned by organizations having a social, educational, or religious purpose, such as a school, a church, a hospital, club, or lodge, and they're located within various zones throughout the city. There's a couple of reasons to consider this program. One, in terms of when we were looking at our housing element sites, and then we started evaluating parcels or sites within the city. We had to do that to look at what we have as inventory to accommodate that 8,549 units. When we did that, we identified a number of vacant or underutilized parcels associated with institutional properties. Many of these parcels are associated with religious institutions and include land associated with large parking fields. The Housing Department also has received input from nonprofit institutions that are interested in developing affordable housing, supportive housing, or shelters on underutilized portions of their property as part of their mission, outreach plan, and in conjunction with their existing assembly use. The concept is fairly straightforward, which is to study over the next 1 to 3 years a program that could allow vacant and underutilized parcels associated with institutional properties. As I mentioned, that could be schools and surplus properties that schools and school districts may dispose of, including also a study of churches, hospital, or lodges. And again, the idea is that on those underutilized or vacant parcels, those parcels could potentially accommodate affordable housing, supportive housing, shelters with existing institutional uses and assembly use. What we would need to do, though, is to create development standards which would be appropriate and compatible with the adjacent uses. So a little more work would need to happen as part of that program. But the question is, does the committee support studying that option and that potential new program? So what the program could do is it could create an opportunity for the city to evaluate creative housing options on institutional properties through the year 2029. It would then, we could review the programs that are created in other communities and look at their successes and decide how those programs could potentially work within our community. We could then take those example programs, tailor them for our community, and evaluate if such programs will be practical in our city. And it could also provide a creative opportunity to address the housing crisis. What the program doesn't do, it doesn't require the city to full-blown develop a program. We could do the study, we could do the analysis, and ultimately we could decide not to implement an institutional land use housing program. It's important also to note that while the question is, should we create this program, our current 6th cycle arena does not rely on this program to meet the housing numbers that I previously provided to you. I also wanted to go over new housing element laws. They are very complex, and there are a number of laws that have been adopted and required that cities and counties address in their 6th housing element cycle. So I want to just hit briefly on what those programs are. The first is something known as site inventory density requirements. I won't belabor what assembly bills those are associated with, but they're laid out in the staff report. The state law requires that cities and counties rezone parcels to allow sufficient density to accommodate the production of affordable housing. The City Council already adopted and gave direction to staff to utilize 30 dwelling units per acre, which is the state's default density, and to allow 30 dwelling units per acre for lower income housing units. So sites which were in prior housing elements and that are now zoned at 30 dwelling units per acre per our housing element would be considered by right to be developed. That means no discretionary review if those units provide 20% affordable housing on the sites. So again, the key is that the city's allowance to regulate affordable housing properties and development projects when those sites were in prior housing elements is removed with this new law when those sites were in prior housing elements and include at least 20% affordable units. State law also requires the city to demonstrate development potential to accommodate housing on parcels between a half acre and up to 10 acres. And the goal is really to focus on housing production between that range of size. And those are regulations that are required by state law, and our sixth cycle draft housing element establishes a number of programs to comply with that new site inventory density requirement. The next new law is adequate housing inventory, or something known as no net loss. So as part of our RENA, the city is required to identify sufficient lower income sites to accommodate our RENA. As I showed you in a prior slide, our lower income and very low RENA represents 2,911 lower income and very low units. The no net loss provision is that the city should establish more sites to accommodate that lower income and very low income unit and have a surplus or 15% above that number. So instead of establishing capacity for lower income units on sites in the city of 2,911 units to be constructed over that 8-year window, the guidance under that new law, the no net loss law, is the city should establish capacity for lower income and very low income units of up to or of a total of 3,348 units. That idea is that then over time, it's possible that certain parcels may not develop with very low or low income units. Therefore, over the 8-year window of time, the city would have sufficient capacity to accommodate affordable housing in the city in that 8-year window. It will be important for the city to maintain adequate sites throughout the planning period to accommodate that RENA number, and the city must identify additional sites if development results in shortfall of those sites, meaning over the 8-year window, if we're taking away from our lower income units and we are showing that we can't meet that total over that window, we would have to go back through and do general plan amendments and zone changes in order to show that we have sufficient parcels and lower income allocations throughout the city to meet that RENA. The next law pertains to something called the Housing Accountability Act, which states that the city may not change an existing land use designation to prohibit residential development or lower the intensity of residential development. The draft housing element that will be coming out very soon will have a program to address this law. The next law is something called affirmatively furthering fair housing. New state law requires jurisdictions to develop a plan to address significant disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunities for all persons, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, disability, and other characteristics protected by the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. The draft housing element includes a program to address affirmatively furthering fair housing. Another program in the draft housing element that will be released pertains to accessory dwelling units. This 2019 law requires a program in the housing element to incentivize and promote the creation of ADUs. Consistent with new law, the city updated our ADU program in 2019, which became effective in 2020. The 2020 program simplified the ADU permitting process. It revised development standards, and it waived parking requirements consistent with state law when an ADU was located within a half mile of public transit. The updated program has proven to be very popular. In 2020, about 117 accessory dwelling units were permitted, compared to an annual average of 48 ADUs in the prior 3 years. So you can see the success of our new program, and we'll continue to lean on that success. The city is proposing 3 ADU programs in the housing element that support and update the 2020 ADU program. You'll see new programs in the draft housing element pertaining to accessory dwelling units. Additionally, another new law pertains to low barrier navigation centers and supportive housing. A low barrier navigation center is a temporary living facility that connects individuals experiencing homelessness to income, public benefits, shelter, and other resources. The new law requires navigation centers to be approved by right in areas zoned for mixed uses and non-residential zones permitting multifamily development. Supportive housing combines affordable housing with coordinated services to help people struggling with physical and mental health issues. The new law requires supportive housing be permitted by right in all zones where multifamily and mixed uses are permitted. Our housing element includes programs to comply with that state law. And finally, the other new law, SB 35, Streamline Affordable Housing. That law requires streamlined approvals for development projects that meet certain parameters, such as compliance with the general plan or zoning standards, and a provision of 10 to 15% lower income housing be constructed within that project, and that project include a commitment to prevailing wage. Our draft housing element includes programs to comply with SB 35. Now I wanted to give an update on our 2021 RHNA update schedule. In order to meet the HCD mandated 6th housing element adoption guidelines, the city will need to implement the following meeting schedule. We envision in mid-March releasing the draft housing element. We envision having a community meeting March 10th or 11th. March 10th and 11th. We are targeting that as a virtual meeting. That, depending upon when that draft housing element is released, we may push that March 11th meeting back, and that will be a virtual meeting, and it'll be noticed on our housing element website. It's currently on our housing element website, but if we change the meeting from the 11th, it will be promoted very publicly. At this point, we're thinking that we'll go to Planning Commission on March 18th, and then the City Council public hearing at the end of April. Then in early May, we would submit the draft housing element to HCD for input. From March until May, we'll be working on the environmental document preparation for our housing element. And then July, when we get comments back from HCD, we'll begin making the modifications to that document. And then begin in August with community engagement and Planning Commission hearings. And then present in September to the City Council the final housing element for adoption. Staff's recommendation is that the Community Service, Public Safety, and Housing and Economic Development Committee receive a report on the status of the city's update to the 2021 to 2029 housing element, which is known as the 6th cycle housing element, including an update on sites inventory, schedule, and next steps, and to provide input on a proposed new housing element program conceptually titled Institutional Land Use Housing Opportunity Program. As mentioned, Emilio Ramirez is also in attendance, and we are both available to answer any of your questions regarding the housing element or this institutional program.